भैया ये ऐप देख के बताइए ना कितना लगेगा.
Bro, I'm hungry and we have to keep working. Just look on my phone and order some pizza, no?
Why is the delivery so late? What yaar? They said 10 minutes and it's been 15. I'm going to be so late for my manicure.
ఓహో నేను మర్చిపోయాను. కన్నా, can you buy some deepams from the app?
Hello and welcome to L is for Labor, your source of information for all things labor. This series takes you through the world of work in India. So, let's talk about gig work. Today, the gig economy is practically inseparable from our daily lives. Whether you ran out of tomatoes for dinner and decide on a 10-minute grocery run, or you whip out your phone to send a book back to your forgetful cousin. But where did it all begin? As a phenomenon, gig work is both really old and still rather new. Some of the early usage dates back to the early 1900s when American jazz musicians would use the term gigs to talk about their live performances. And while many of us adore music, the sad part about the history of gig work is that its roots and history lie steeped in worker precarity. As the early 1900s rolled into the 1930s, the Great Depression hit the United States, and many workers were seen seeking out multiple gigs just to make their most basic ends meet. If you look up here on the screen, you will see droves of workers standing in front of a soup kitchen in Chicago just to get a hot bite. Finding a definition for gig work is actually quite hard because it's a really broad term. Now, the words gig work probably conjure in your mind someone driving a cab that you requested via an app, or someone else delivering you that delicious dum biryani from your favorite restaurant. But actually, the term is much broader. While the aforesaid workers are indeed gig workers, the term also extends to anyone really who is doing work by the gig. So this includes freelancers who are working on a gig by gig basis, or anyone really who doesn't fall under the umbrella of traditional employer-employee relations. And secondly, what we call the platform economy. So your delivery apps, ride-sharing apps, all of these things are actually a subset of the gig economy. According to official figures, there are currently 7.7 million gig workers in India, and this is expected to grow to 23.5 million by 2030, about 3 times the current number. So, who exactly are these gig workers?
So we had a survey, and in the survey we covered almost 5,000 gig workers. And among the 5,000 gig workers that we surveyed and interviewed, mere 2.3% were women. So this finding by itself is indicative of 2 things. The first is that all gig work is not women friendly. They are scarcely found in location-based platform work because this kind of work requires mobility. And we all know that women are mobility constrained, both by socio-cultural reasons and because of the heightened risk of personal safety that they generally face in urban space. Remember that the average age of gig workers in our survey of respondents was just 28 years. So mostly it is young people who have the responsibility of taking not only their care but also taking care of their parents. They desperately are looking for some kind of job which could sustain their life.
I also asked experts what they thought about gig work as a sustainable source of employment. Here's what they said.
मगर यहाँ पे सारे एग्रीगेटर कंपनीज ने वर्कर को, अब क्या बोलूं मैं आपको, एक पार्टनर, एक यूजर, अपने मर्जी माफिक नाम देके जो है एम्प्लॉयर का रिलेशनशिप खत्म करने की कोशिश पूरी की, और उसको आड़े रख के बोलते कि हम कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग पे नहीं बैठ सकते. गिग वर्कर इज अ फ्रीलांसर वर्कर, वो अपनी मर्जी माफिक काम कर सकता है। तो मेरा सीधा सवाल है, अगर जब मर्जी माफिक काम कर सक रहा तो आप क्यों बोल रहे कि आप 8 घंटे के लिए ऑन राइट पे रह जाओ, आपको इंसेंटिव मिलेगा, काम करो, आज दीपावली है, आज रमजान है।
So what we're seeing is that gig workers generally tend to be young, and there is also a gendered hue to the types of jobs people do. Much like our last video on domestic work, we're also seeing that gig workers similarly suffer with a basic lack of protections and being excluded from the labor laws, so not having a minimum wage or social security protections. Moreover, the very benefits of flexibility that aggregators claim clearly have potential downsides. Workers also allege that companies are skirting their obligations to them by breaking the traditional employer-employee relationship and using terms such as delivery partner and the like. So what can we do about this institutionally?
मैं बोल रहा हूँ कि हर बिल पे, चाहे ड्राइवर का हो, डिलीवरी बॉय का हो, हर एक बिल पे एक परसेंटेज कट के आप उनका वेलफेयर बोर्ड में फी कटना चाहिए और वहां से टोटल उनका वेलफेयर स्कीम्स डिवाइड होना चाहिए कि जितना काम तो जितना मेहनत करेगा वो उसको काम के हिसाब से उसके स्कीम्स भी डिजाइन होंगे।
There is, however, some good news. With various states being at different stages of drawing up legislation in support of gig workers and the 2020 Social Security Code at the national level as well.
So what we are asking is central legislation based on the tripartite model, based on the entitlement and rights model, and which has comprehensive regulatory framework as well as sufficient social safety nets. And after that, you have the policy space, the legislative space available with the state governments in India to add up further.
A big factor tying all of this together is, of course, digitization. Now, we do have technological innovations to thank for changing our lives in positive ways, but the mediation of the labor market by tech could result in some downsides. The way I remember this is the same way I used to by heart the periodic table in school. His apron danced, or H for human touch, A for algorithms, and D for data privacy. Let's start with the human touch aspect. There has been a lot of representation regarding the interactions between humans and robots in both Bollywood and Collywood, whether it is SRK's Ravan or Rajni's Endiran. But the reality for gig workers when it comes to these interactions is typically far more grave. For one, we are increasingly living in a ratings-reliant world where human managers are now being replaced by tech managers or technology. So, if your last boss was utterly horrible, imagine what they would be like with no feelings at all.
क्यों आप वर्कर को रेटिंग के जैसा देख रहे? क्यों इंसान को इंसान की तरह नहीं देख रहे? इंसान को खिलौना बना रहे, कभी 10 मिनट में डिलीवरी, कभी 5 मिनट में डिलीवरी.
This takes us to our second issue in his apron danced, the A for algorithms. Now, companies have been increasingly delegating their decision making away from human managers to these technology algorithmic managers. So what this means is sometimes even if workers have extenuating circumstances such as being unable to attend work because a relative passed away or not being able to finish a task because a machine broke down, workers are simply not dealt with some empathy. In 2014, a web design consultant named Eric Meyer coined a term, inadvertent algorithmic cruelty. And this was on the heels of him having an awful experience when a social media website reminded him of a memory with his daughter who had passed away. Being heavily entrenched in digital systems may even come with other biases.
No, we do have experience, personal experience of workers where they do share such kind of experience where they have been rated unfairly by customers based on certain non-professional criteria. And this could include religion, this could include caste, this could also include behavior, cultural behavior. This could also include denying extra services to the customers. So my point is that ratings might not be fair to workers in some cases, and workers should at least have the access to respond to the adverse rating.
The last part of our acronym HAD is D, which stands for data privacy. Here are two lenses via which we could look at data privacy infringement questions. The social psychologist cum philosopher Shoshana Zuboff critiques the unbridled overreach of tech companies with data in her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. I have pinned her definition of surveillance capitalism for you to see on the screen. A line that stayed with me was, "We are not alone in falling prey to the technology illusion. It is an enduring theme of social thought, as old as the Trojan horse. Despite this, each generation stumbles into the quicksand of forgetting that technology is an expression of other interests. In modern times, this means the interests of capital, and in our time, it is surveillance capital that commands the digital milieu and directs our trajectory towards the future." Another term that sometimes comes up when researching worker surveillance is the panopticon. Now, the panopticon is a prison system that was conceived by an English philosopher named Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. He talked about a circular prison system where there would be one guard able to surveil all of the prison inmates at the same time without their knowledge or consent. If it sounds eerie, it's because it is. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what it means if workers are sometimes feeling this way.
राम भाई, हमारे श्याम भाई, सलीम भाई इडली मंगा रहे, डोसा मंगा रहे, हर रोज वो ऐप पे कोसे होटल से मंगा रहे, जब जाके उनका होम किचन बना। और वो होम किचन का डेटा कौन दिए और किसको पूछ के लिए, किसका एक्सेस था वो डेटा पे?
So, what can we do about this? As we've seen a little earlier in our video, part of this process involves pushing for legal and policy changes at the national and state levels. But there's more.
So there are some good practices. I won't say best, but there are some good practices that are coming from the aggregators itself. And some companies have started building rest points where gig workers can rest when they are on duty, but when they do not have the delivery at hand. So these are good practices and these must be encouraged.
And as responsible citizens, there are several things that we can do. One, for example, is to keep water easily accessible at the door, especially during the hot season. The second would be to pay workers via their preferred means and platforms. For example, sometimes cash and UPI payments may be preferred owing to delays in the receipt of the amounts for jobs done. And finally, just as we're doing now in this conversation, looking to see how we can inform ourselves on the lives, difficulties and benefits of gig work to the workers. Before I sign off, if like me you're already dreaming of Sunday and kicking back with ordering from your favorite restaurant that delicious biryani with the crispy caramelized onions on top, just give a thought to the gig workers who enable so much of our lives. Whether delivering food on a Sunday or all of that amazing music that they have brought to us through the ages.
The migration story.